Nice to have you. Oh, let's wait for the audio to kick in. Okay, there we go. Hey, Judy. Okay, first, just a couple commercial announcements. Next week, we will not be having class for a good reason, which leads to my second commercial announcement. Some of you who know already know this, that I have published my second volume of Piyutim. I'm having a Hebrew language launch next week in FS6, actually by a teacher who was instrumental in helping me get involved in this in the first place. Bezrat Hashem, those of you also who see this on Facebook, or I may have sent you a message, I have another book, this one in English, nothing to do with Piyutim, it's at the printer now. And shortly after Shavuot, there'll be a book launch here in the neighborhood that will focus more on the the English book, but we'll also have a content of the Piyutim, the second volume as well. So lots of stuff going on in life, Baruch Hashem, among the regular everyday things. And now it's, of course, Bagriot season, so it keeps me extra busy. And I know you all want to hear my entire life story right now, so we'll forget to close the Tanya book. Anyways, okay, back to reality. Before we begin chapter 7, Perek Zayin, just a little reminder of a couple things where we're holding. This is one of the chapters dealing with the Nefesh HaBahamit. We said that Gimel Dalet Hey was the Nefesh Elokit, Vav Zayin Chet, more or less, is the Nefesh Chiyunit or Nefesh HaBahamit. And where we left off last week was the distinction a little bit clearer than we've had in the past of what we referred to as Klipat Noga and Gimel Klipot HaTmeot. Klipat Noga, which is going to be the subject of chapter 7, much more in depth, it means it is something that is not inherently kadosh. It is not that it's bad. It could be, like I say, this glass of water. What does it mean? It does. When you look at it, you don't see kedusha. When you look at a Sefer Torah, you look at tefillin, look at mezuzah, you look at Shabbat candle, look at chalot for Shabbat, you see kedusha. You see something that is what we call batel to Hashem. It is nullified to God. But something that is not, but has potential, has this little spark of light, so to speak, is called klipa or klipat noga. And we're going to see the idea of the ability for us to change that status. But there is something that's on a lower level, and he mentioned this at the end of last chapter of Perek Vav, and that level is the idea of what's known as Gimel Klipot HaTmeot, the three completely impure klipot. There is no light, there is no making it kadosh, although we can make an argument for that that's not always true. We're going to use that basically as the distinction. It's going to talk more in depth in this chapter about the idea of Klipat Noga. That'll be the focus of the chapter. However, before we start, I want to show you a slide that should look familiar to you because it's from the very first class, not the introduction, but the actual first class that we had in Tanya. What happens when you learn something like Tanya, where you begin the book with statements and questions, and then you learn many, many, many months worth of information, and you don't come to those answers, nor do you refer back to the beginning at all. So you kind of lose a certain fundamental basis of why we're doing the book in the first place. It's wonderful that we're learning about Nefesh HaBahamit, Nefesh Elokit, the Machshava Dibur Maaseh, the idea of speech, thought, and action, and all these terminologies we're learning, getting more involved, and the difference between Nefesh Bahamit, Nefesh Elokit, Klipat Noga, Gimel Klipot HaTmeot, wonderful. But we can't lose sight of two things. Number one is the Shar HaSefer, the title page of the book, which gave us our marching orders of what this book was going to be about. And I'm mentioning this and a couple other things that I think we need to stop and regroup for a minute. He says it's this book of Tanya, which we referred to the Sefer Beinonim, and we said really one of the things at the beginning of the book was to define what a Benoni was, and we said that this average person is almost impossible, let alone forget being a tzaddik. So we haven't answered that at all yet. We are going to get to that eventually. But what's really important for us to never lose sight of is this. The book is where I put the arrow, miyusad, I'll make it bigger here. Move that little arrow over too, make it pretty. Miusad al pasuk. This book is based on the pasuk. Ki karov elecha hadavar me'od. That this thing, Torah, is very close to you. Me'od, very close. Beficha, in your mouth. Bilvavcha, in your heart. La'asoto, to do it. You'll notice we talked many times already about for the three parts. I was almost about to say trilogy. The three parts of machashava, dibur, and maaseh. What's machashava, dibur, and maaseh? Thought, speech, and action. Here we have thought, levavcha, your heart, speech, picha, your mouth, and la'asoto is the action part. So he tells us that this book is based on this pasuk, that not only are we able to attain what he's about to tell us in this book, but based on this pasuk, it's karov me'od. It's very attainable. And what's its purpose? Leva'er hetev, to clearly explain, eich hu karov me'od, how is it that it's very attainable? Bederech aruka u'ktzara, how it's attainable in a way that is long but short. And we talked about back then, Bezrat Hashem doesn't just mean with the help of God. It was a certain thing. We're going to come back to that page, but I want to restate this thesis of the book so we don't lose sight of this, because it's wonderful that we're learning all these terms and getting more in depth into each thing and how they interconnect and what they are and what they aren't. But we can't forget this part, that the eventual goal is for us to understand that Torah is, and keeping the mitzvot, getting closer to Hashem, is not only achievable and attainable, but extremely achievable and attainable. And of course, we're going to have to understand why the pasuk says me'od. Just say it's attainable, it's achievable. Okay, we'll come back to that. What we're going to do.
Rabbi, it almost mimics that pasuk that we read at the onset of Elul in the Torah, when it doesn't really talk about it as tshuva, but we know that whatever they're talking about that it is attainable is tshuva.
Yes, but that's really what this is. Tshuva means the idea of getting closer to Hashem. That's exactly the pasuk.
Right.
This is that pasuk.
It is. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah, it is that pasuk, and this is the idea of being able to.
What parsha is that from?
Nitzavim, I believe, but I have to look off the top of my head. I forgot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I didn't know that it was referring to that exact pasuk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see where we're holding now. So if you look back for a minute, I'm not going to put it on the screen. If you look back for a minute, the end of the last chapter, if you have the text in front of you, when it's talking about the Gimel Klipot HaTmeot, talks about that it has Ein Bahem Tov Klal. There is no good within them whatsoever. And those are things that are the non-kosher animals. We discussed, actually, Rav Silberberg discussed on the video I showed you, what does it mean that the non-Jews are Gimel Klipot HaTmeot? Doesn't mean they're bad, doesn't mean they're evil. Just the fact that their neshama cannot connect to Hashem like a Jew's neshama can. Those are Gimel Klipot HaTmeot. And we left off with okay, so give me more information now about Klipat Noga. So let's take a look. I'm going to read a decent amount tonight, and then we're going to go back. I'll make a couple of comments, and then look at some comments from Rav Steinsaltz. But unlike the items and things that were mentioned at the end of chapter 6, at the end of Perek Vav, with the Gimel Klipot HaTmeot, the items now that he's going to talk about, their life source is from Klipat Noga. Remember we talked about that everything has a life source from Hashem. It's chiyut, something that is kadosh, that is not sitra achra, something that's kadosh, has a direct from the pnimiyut of Hashem, so to speak, from the internal, whatever that even means, and that everything else that's klipa has it from the achoraim, from the back of Hashem, from an indirect source, and it has to go through tzimtzumim, it has to go through contraction, so the light eventually gets teenies. Again, we're talking human terms right now for something spiritual. To give chiyut to, whether it's a blade of grass, a mouse for a computer, a pair of glasses, whatever it might be, because everything has to have a source from Hashem, a life source from Hashem. What is What are the forms, though, of klipat noga? What forms do they take? Something that is klipat noga, I'm going to repeat this, has the capacity to elevate it to kedusha, or it has the capacity to become gimel klipot hatmeot. I'm going to just mention briefly that example for the last item. Milk is klipat noga. Milk is milk. Meat, klipat noga. Meat is meat. If you were to cook them together, they become gimel klipot hatmeot. They're asur on 3 levels. You can't cook it. Well, you cooked it, so that's already the first isur. You can't have hana'ah from it, and you can't eat it. So it's 3 isurim involved. That's the lo tava shel gedi b'chalei v'mo that are involved, and that's gimel klipot hatmeot. So on one hand, klipat noga item can be brought down to the lowest level in some cases, but more often than not, it can be brought up from klipat noga to kedusha. Here's the capacity. How does that happen? What's the difference? That's what this chapter is about. Let's take a look. And now he's going to give us some items that will fall into the category of klipat noga. Again, it's really, I can't stress this enough. And I'll tell you why I'm stressing the following sentence so much. Before I learned Tanya, go back 2 years, 3 years ago, whenever you would hear the word sitra achra and klipa, my knee-jerk reaction is evil, bad, it's not good. And by the way, that's the usage by many people who are not familiar with Tanya, that it means bad. And yes, it can be. Sitra achra theoretically could, because it's also another nickname, so to speak, for the Satan. But it does not have that connotation here in the book. So we're going to look at now some examples of klipat noga that does not mean they're bad. It's just they're klipat noga. They're not kedusha. I'm right over here, the very, very beginning. Nefesh hachiyunita bahamit shabi Yisrael, the essential soul, the animalistic soul of a Jew. Shemitzada klipa hamelubeshet b'dam adam kanal, as we mentioned in the last chapter, that the nefesh bahamit courses through our veins, literally in the blood. Nafshot, so that's the nefesh bahamit itself is klipat noga. In addition to that, nafshot behemot, bechayot, ve'ofot, v'dagim torim. As opposed to the last chapter when we talked about treif animals, now he says kosher animals also are klipa. Umutarim b'achila. They're kosher, they're permitted to be eaten, but they're still klipa. A chicken by itself, in and of itself, is klipa. V'kiyum v'chiyut kol hadomem b'chol hatzomeach hamutar b'achila. So too, everything that is, and it has its life source, that is, whether it is inanimate or it's live, it grows, that is also permitted to be eaten, such as vegetables, such as fruits. V'chein kiyum v'chiyut kol ha'maaseh dibur u'machashava b'inyanei ha'olam hazeh. So too, anything that we have, that we do as far as an action, a thought or a speech, that has to do with inyanei olam hazeh. For example, where are you going tomorrow to go? What are you doing tomorrow? You're going to go watch a movie. You're going to talk. You're thinking about what your schedule is the next day. That's not at that moment speech, thought, or action that's connecting to God. She'ein bahem tzad isur. There's nothing asur about it. I can think about what my schedule is tomorrow. Lo shoresh v'lo anaf mishin samachem mitzvot lo taseh. His expression means root or branch. That has any connection with any isur, any of the 365 isurim. If I'm thinking again about my schedule tomorrow, there's nothing asur about it. There's no mitzvot lo taseh. Neither with the isur itself, nor any subcategory of them. Meaning they're not doing anything wrong per se, the speech, action, or thought. But just that they're not at that moment being done to serve God. But rather all the purpose of that action or thought, speech, and action is in order to do something they need or want for their body, or something that they desire. I may be eating a meal, for example. Even though the item I'm doing, the action I'm doing, is something to keep me alive. Food I'm eating. But that at that moment, I don't have in mind that I'm eating it because I want to be healthy so I can serve Hashem, then in that situation, let me get to the next slide here and make it big. Whoops, too big. In that kind of situation, lo adifi ma'aseh dibur ma'chashavot elu, there's no difference. All these actions are no better than the nefesh habahamit itself, meaning elu min nefesh achinut habahamit atzma. My thoughts, my speech, my action, even though they're not involved in anything asur. Forget about lashon hara and eating treif. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about thought, speech, and action that is something I'm doing in my day-to-day life. But I'm not doing it l'shem shamayim. I'm not doing it because I want to serve Hashem or I want to get closer to Hashem. Those thoughts, speech, and actions are no different than the nefesh habahamit itself, meaning klipa. V'hakol kasher lakol. Nishpa v'nimshach mi'madrega hashenit shebeklipot u'sitra achra sheklipa revit anikret klipat noga. All those actions, I'm up to here right now. All those actions fall into the category of klipat noga and are all influenced, as it were, by klipat noga. Shebe olam hazeh hanikra olam ha'asiya rubo kikulo. That these things I'm talking about now, he says about in this world of olam ha'asiya, the majority of the actions that we take, ra rak me'at tov mu'urav betocha. The majority, majority of the actions are bad. Only a small amount of good is mixed in. Let me read one more in the brackets and then I'll explain all this. Shemimena ba'ot midot tovot. From within those actions, those thoughts, those speech, etc., can come good midot. Shebenefesh habahamit shebiyisrael k'mo shekatavti la'el. Okay, what's going on? First, we have to understand what he just said until this point in the very basic understanding. And that's as follows. Just because a person is not doing an Aveira, it does not mean that they're connecting to God. If I sit on my chair, if I sit in this chair right now, and I know I'm not teaching, and I'm trying to figure out how to put a new new insert into my pen, right here. There's nothing wrong with that. But that pen insert and that pen is klipat noga. It's not, I'm not doing that. That it's nothing there involved in serving of Hashem. Potentially I can. We're going to talk about that. Obviously, we've talked about this before, because you could do something with it to raise it up. How? I can write Divrei Torah with it, right? I can highlight stuff in my sefer with it. Then you've raised it from klipa to kedusha. That's great, and that's how you're connecting to Hashem. But I don't want to get there yet, because we need to understand this basic idea. As long as it is sitra acha / klipat noga, it is not in service of Hashem. Now, what he is mentioning here, he mentioned a phrase, which is rubo kikulo, which literally means majority, almost all, right? Rubo kikulo ra. At this point in the book, the Admor HaZaken is dividing everything in the universe into three categories. This is really a critical piece of information. Number one, Kedusha. Number two, Gimel Klipot HaTmeot. Number three, Klipat Noga. Now, why is that important? Because let's go one more step. He also tells us, and again, we're not using exact numbers here because you can't, it's not theoretically even possible, that basically the Gimel Klipot, Kedusha items in the world, let's say make up 5% of what's around. The Gimel Klipot HaTmeot, another 5%. And then 90%, Rubo Kikula, the vast majority of what exists on Earth, let's not talk about the beyond Earth, but the vast majority of what does exist is Klipat Noga. 90%. Again, these are arbitrary numbers, but we're just to give it a feel for it, 5% Gimel Klipot HaTmeot. can't be elevated. They're not kedusha. They're the opposite of kedusha. They're the worst they possibly can be. The other end is, or not the other end. The next possibility, is the other end. The spectrum kedusha, maybe 5%. In other words, if you were to walk around and look for things that inherently look and represent just by looking at them as being kedusha, and therefore that means again bitul to Hashem. What are you going to find? Tefillin, talit, Sefer Torah, candles for Shabbat, a bunch of things, but Sfarim. But the vast majority of what exists, whether it's a tree, it's a pen, a computer, a book, is Klipat Noga. And with that Klipat Noga, he's telling us, and he will continue to tell us, that in that majority of that area, meaning Klipat Noga, Hashem says, I am not deciding the fate of that object. I'm not deciding the fate of that Klipat Noga item. You are. It's up to you. Before we encounter an object, it's klipa, right? If I didn't come into my house yet, and in the house is laying a pen, I have not touched it, I haven't seen it, I'm not doing anything with it yet. It's on the table. It's klipa. It's klipat noga. I can look at it, someone walks in, they see it, it's a pen, it doesn't represent kedusha. But when I use it, I pick it up and I do an action with it. And like I say, I write a Dvar Torah with it, or I underline stuff in the book, or I write something, whatever. And I'm doing that l'shem shemayim. Why am I writing a Dvar Torah? Just for my health? Just to show off I can write some word of Torah? I'm doing so this way, I'm doing the will of Hashem. Remember, we already talked about that even more, how it's when it has to do with the brain. That raises the pen, even if it's only just for a moment. 5 minutes, that pen is raised and elevated to Kedusha. Again, it's up to us to make that change. The object or the action can either end up remaining as Klipat Noga. If I pick up the pen and I write a little note, don't forget to bring the apple to school, the pen remains Klipat Noga. I can elevate it to Kedusha, right? I can write a Dvar Torah. Or, God forbid, I can drag it down to Gimel Klipot Atmeot. I write a little note. I always pick on, in different classes, I pick on different people. I write a note to Danny. I say, dear Danny, you're not going to believe what I saw someone do today. You got to hear this. And I write a little note about it, right? Straight Lashon Hara. I then taken that down. I've dragged this pen down to Gimel Klipot Atmeot at that moment. Because not only is it not serving Hashem, not only is it not bitul to Hashem, it also has now gone to the exact opposite of something it's not elevated, it's now dragged down. It all depends on my approach to that object. And that's a majorly important thesis in this chapter and will run its course throughout a lot of the book, that we have to understand that klipa does not remain klipat noga. Klipat noga is up to us to make a change. Now, if your brain is thinking ahead a little bit, and you're, what's the expression in Pirkei Avot? Ezeu chacham haroeh et hanolad. You already should be able to start making a little connection. If those synapses are firing in just the right way, that you're going to understand that part of our job in this world is to connect to Hashem, is complete bitul to Hashem. And we do that when we encounter things in the world that are klipat noga, and we elevate them. That will be part of we're going to deal with much later. But at that, what I'd like to do is take a look at a couple of slides, not to make it much smaller, from Rosh Steinsaltz. And this first comment is based on, I'll tell you, the whole idea of items that are kosher foods, for example, nothing wrong with them, or my actions, my speech, my thought, nothing that may be wrong with them, just they're not at that moment the acts of kedusha, nor are they, God forbid, gimel klipot atmeot. Those are klipat noga. So he says there's one word on the other page. Tchum, I'd have to make a copy of the page for one word. Tchum rachav ze kolel, this wide range of items includes et kol hadvarim v'hamaasim ba'olam, everything and action in this world, she'en bahem kol tzad shel isur, they're not prohibited. O pagam, there's nothing wrong with them. Ach, but Gamein bahem kishilatzman sad shel mitzvah. They don't, in and of themselves, have a mitzvah involved. They're not tefillin. No one's doing the mitzvah with them at that moment. This item, these kinds of items, this area, is not from the dark world. Something that's prohibited or impure. Tchum hachulin means ordinary, daily. Hatchum neutrali, something that's neutral. Let's talk in terms we know. Bisari, chalavi, par. Milk, fleshik, par. It's neither bisari, nor is it chalavi. I'll leave you to decide if gimel klipot tatmeot is bisari or chalavi is. But parv means parv. It's neither. It's neither gimel klipot tatmeot, nor is it kedusha. She'eno avera ve'eno mitzvah. It's neither a sin nor is it a mitzvah. Davashu asur ben midivrei Torah ben midivrei sofrim shayach kamor l'shlosh klipot tatmeot. Something that's prohibited, or something that's asur, whether it's from the Torah prohibition or the rabbis have prohibited the item or the action, fall in the category of gimel klipot tatmeot. Davar she'en bo isur, something that does not have a prohibition. Again, I come back to this glass of water that's sitting here. There's nothing asur about it. In those cases, are not completely klipa. But at the same time, it's not kedusha. It's a chasidim haya mekubal lomar. By chasidim, it used to be said, masha asur asur umasha mutar mutar. Slicha, masha asur asur umasha mutar ein tzrichim. It used to be said that which is prohibited, that which is permitted is not necessary. What does that mean? Klomar, masha asur hu tameh. Something that is prohibited is inherently unclean. Usitra achra mitzad atzmo. It itself by itself is sitra achra. Gam masha mutar, also that which is permitted, hu klipa v'sitra achra, still is considered klipa or sitra achra. Hamutar eno kedusha. That which is permissible but is not inherently kadosh is still klipa. V'hulachen sitra achra. Sitra achra kol she'eno kedusha. Sitra achra we define is anything that's not kedusha. Masheno mitzvah, anything that's not a mitzvah. If I take a baseball bat and I hit a ball with it, there's no mitzvah for me to do that. Sheno kadosh bofen pa'il. It's not an action that's actively kadosh. Umemela klipa. Havdel ben asur mutar. The difference between prohibited and permitted. Eno havdel ben kedusha leklipa. It's not a difference of holiness versus klipa. Ben dargot shel klipa. But they just fall into differences of levels of klipa. Ben klipa shnitnet l'tikun, a klipa that can be corrected, meaning I can elevate it, such as that glass of water. Ben klipa she'ena nitenet l'tikun. On the other hand, there's something, a kind of a klipa, gimel klipot tatmeot, that cannot be fixed. Basar v'chalav, treif animal, can't be fixed. So he wants us to understand something clear. Again, just because something is not prohibited doesn't make it kadosh. In any stretch of the imagination, it's klipa. Something that's asur is also klipa, just different levels of klipa. Let's see his next comment. We said that even when I do something such as eat or drink, and even if I'm doing it for my body, but I'm not doing it to serve Hashem, then that action is still klipa. What am I doing? When I do such an eating, when we're finished this class, Bezrat Hashem, I'm going to go tomorrow, I'm going to come home and I'm going to eat supper. Now, I need to eat, I need to survive. If I skip supper, I would still survive, I hope. But when I'm eating, generally speaking, it's still klipa. Why am I doing the eating? Remember, we defined the nefesh bahamit and nefesh elokit very specifically. The nefesh elokit is bitul. It is 100% nullified to Hashem. We also said that the nefesh bahamit is ego. Again, ego doesn't mean bad. It just means it has a portion of me in it. The word for that in Chassidut is yeshut. That ego, why am I eating? Because I want to eat. I need to eat. I'm hungry. When it's not because, oh, I want to serve God and be healthy, therefore I should eat, it's klipa. There's no difference at that moment from my eating and any other animal. When I sit down to eat supper, or when you sat down to eat lunch today, or supper tonight, there isn't an aspect of kedusha in it. So therefore, automatically, it's part of sitra achra. A person could be like a glutton. לא רק בהיתר, אלא גם בתכלית הצניעות הפשטות. אך אין הוא צריך לאכול מעדני מלאכים כדי להיות זולל ושבע. I don't have to eat fancy schmancy stuff in order to be considered a glutton. הוא יכול לאכול פרוסת לחם יבשה ולשתות אחריה רק מים. I could eat a dry piece of bread and drink a glass of water after that, וגם כן להיות שייך לקליפה. I'm still shy. You might think, oh, it's klipa if I have this catered meal and I have steak and I have wine, and that's really klipa. But if I have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or I have a piece of bread and water, how can that be klipa? It's the same thing because I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it for Hashem. Every action a person does, im kavanato eina l'shem shamayim u'shayach l'tzad acher. His intention is not l'shem shamayim, which means the sake of heaven, which means to connect to God, means to lahit batel, to become nullified to God. It's connected to sitra achra. Adam yachol lilbosh bigdei meshi v'zahav. A person can wear silk and golden clothing. V'zoti avodat Hashem, and it could theoretically be a service of God. Adam yachol lilbosh sak. A person can wear sackcloth. Zoti klipa, and that can be klipa. I'm skipping the story here. Adam yachol efol lichyot betachlit hakashut v'apetzniut v'tzimtzum. A person can live a very modest life. A person can live a life that's filled with kashrut and doesn't do any averot and doesn't. V'chol zeh l'shem atzmo. It's still for himself. What does that mean? If I don't bring Hashem into the equation, let's first take the positive because it could be a while until we get to it. So I want to make sure we don't leave it hanging like this and everything sounds negative. If I sit down to a meal, and before I do this, before I sit down, to be honest with you, I don't usually do this, and I should, we all should, that I have this thought that I'm about to eat because I want to serve Hashem better. I want to be healthy. If I go to the gym, shalom neda, if I go to the gym and I want to work out because I want to exercise, I want to stay healthy because I want to serve Hashem. If I take a walk to get some fresh air, if I whatever it is, but my intention is because I wanted to be able to serve Hashem better, you have elevated all those quote mundane actions, those chulin, to a level of kedusha. At that moment, no one can see that, by the way. If I have intention when I'm eating because I want to be healthy to serve God, you can't see that, but there is that different connection. I've taken that food and I've elevated it. We also do that when we make a bracha. When you make a bracha, you elevate the food, even if it's momentarily. We'll talk later in the book about how long does that connection last. Okay, is it like, we'll see the idea of a flame and a mashal or a parable about it. But right now, understand that if I'm not doing that, I'm eating because I want to eat. I'm going to the gym because I want to go to the gym. I'm taking a walk because I want to take a walk. And God's not part of that equation. That is still for yourself. It's ego. And once it's ego, again, ego does not mean bad, but it's for yourself. That is only sitra achar or klipat noga. In that manner, that's fine. That's the quote from the book, which said there's no difference in my eating action than there is, or my thought, speech, and action. It's all part of my nefesh bahamit, rather. Kamor, meaning a nefesh bahamit not hit bahamut shaladam. The nefesh bahamit doesn't mean a person becomes animalistic. It's not like an ethical degradation of a human being. Oh, he's only eating for himself. Oh, he's like an animal. It doesn't mean that. Oh, he's only thinking about tomorrow's schedule. Like must be an animal. It's not what it means. It's a way of categorizing the individual at that moment. It's no different than any other creation. So just like the nefesh bahamit, so too its actions, its thoughts, its speech, and its thoughts. If I sit here and I think it's a nice day today, that's not good. It's not bad. It's parv. That's a very low For those of you who are English teachers or went through the Bagut system here, you know about hots and lots, higher order thinking skills and lower order thinking skills. If I have a lower order thinking skill, oh, it's a nice day today. It's not good or bad. If I think about, I really want to find a cure for cancer, that's not good or bad as far as, klipa, a kedusha. It's just, it's a thing. No matter how vast and lofty my thoughts are, whether they're low or high, whether he something he needs or desires for his nefesh b'hamit, all right, they're no different than the actual nefesh b'hamit. These actions, they're not a mitzvah. No one is being mitzvah to think about how nice it is out. No one gets a mitzvah to, and they're not l'shem shamayim to think that way. They just don't have anything bad about them. They are klipa. Here's a good difference. David HaMelech tells us in Tilim to look up at the moon and the stars and to ask ourselves, Mi bara ele? Who created these things? If you go outside at night and you see the stars and you see the moon and you look and say, wow, that's just gorgeous. There's nothing wrong with that. That thought, that speech is klipat noga. Why? It's not connecting me to God necessarily. But if I look at that and I think, Marabu ma'asech Hashem, how great are your actions? Where I think only God could have created something like this, so magnificent, so awesome, then my thought process and the statement that I might make to someone standing next to me, like, God is unbelievable. Look at what Hashem did. That has elevated my thought, speech, and action for that moment to a level beyond klipa, and I've changed it to kedusha. It's complete bitul to Hashem, because at that very moment, it's not maybe last very long, I'm having Hashem as part of the equation of what would be. In other words, is my ego being fed when I say, wow, look, Hashem did this Shemayim, the stars. It's about Hashem. At that moment, that thought, speech, and action is bitul to Hashem. I want to do one little one here. No, because I have to expand on this a little bit more. Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'm going to stop here. So what I'm going to do, remind everybody that Bezrat Hashem next week is this, I told you, is the Hebrew book launch for the second volume of the Pew Team. So it's going to be on Tuesday, and that was the only one next week that's available. So we'll not have class. And again, shortly after Shavuot, I'll be passing the information along in the group and in the Facebook. The English book and the Pew book will be shortly after Shavuot. We'll have a book launch here in the neighborhood, and Zat Hashem will have a nice little get together. In the meantime, I want to wish you all a good evening, and also remind everybody who goes to the Mesilat Yesharim class on Wednesday morning tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem, we are meeting in person by the Lifshitz family and on Zoom. Both will be available. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Rabbi.